Well, hello again, friends. It's Rusty Draper with another edition of Chewing the Fat. My dear old dad, he's been gone now for well over 40 years, I guess. And I'll remember my dad for a lot of wonderful reasons. But one of them is he had an incredible work ethic. And he tried his best to instill that into me. But I don't believe that I ever did pass my dad's litmus test. I always thought I would excel much better in a managerial position, like a foreman rather than a laborer. I'll tell you, I didn't want any calluses on my hands. If I was going to have calluses on my hands, it was going to be from playing the guitar or the mandolin. I didn't want them from using a round-mouthed shovel day in and day out. Well, speaking of work, what do you think of this one? Let me run it by you. A clock watcher is not a top-notcher. That's another one of my dear dad's great sayings that he always had tucked away in his old noggin. And I'll tell you, when Dad released one of these verbal treasures of his, I knew the message of the saying was really directed at nobody but me. Now, I confess I was never the brightest light in the harbor, but my dad had a special way of getting his point across. And one of his favorite sayings was the one I just quoted: a top-notcher is not a clock watcher is not a top-notcher. Forgive me on that one. And really what it applied to people, and you know them yourself, you've seen them. Maybe they work for the town that you live in, who knows? That they would always look at their watch and they were wondering how much time had to go by before they'd have their next coffee break, or maybe to even go home for the day. Ah, dear. These people, in my dad's mind, were certainly not top-notchers. In my dad's mind, it was always a huge red flag when a guy looked at his watch. Talking about watches, I've always had a degree of fascination for clocks in general. As I sit here with you tonight, I'm overlooking our living room, and I can count seven clocks in front of me. Now, if you think that's something, before we bought this condo, we owned a house. And there was one spot in the living room where I could see 17 clocks. I've been asked this dozens of times over the years, why I have all these clocks. And here's the answer. Now, I'm sure that every one of you has experienced times when you've had company come over to the house and they just don't know when to go home. They'll talk and talk and talk, their old tongues wagging like a loose board in a lumber truck. Well, as the hour gets late, the man of the house usually, he looks at his watch and he'll say, "Mildred, look at the time. Look at the time. We better get home and let these dear folks go to bed." Well, listen carefully, dear friends. This problem never happens at our house anymore. Nope. Not since I started collecting so many clocks. Everywhere you look in our home, you'll see many timepieces that constantly remind company that it's time to say goodnight. One of the secrets, of course, is to have very loud chimes on your clocks. Now, as I enter this part of my story, I find myself often singing an old song. Oh, you'll know it. You can join me if you want. Remember the one that goes, Oh, I've got big ones, small ones, some the size of your head. Except I changed it a little bit and I say, I got big clocks, small clocks, some the size of your head. Oh, dear. When people ask my wife, Pat, how I'm doing, she's always got a classy line. Oh, she says, well, Rusty's just like an old clock. He has a wonderful tick, but it talks too much. Now, I know that you don't buy into that statement. Do you? I recall a time, almost, once again, 40 years ago, when we would often have a man that would show up on Thursday nights for a short visit. They were never short. No. He was a nice man, lovely man, but friends, could he ever talk up a storm? Just didn't know enough to go home at a decent hour. Now, this was back in the day when Pat and I and the two kids were living in Gravenhurst, but we were working in Aurelia. That's the time when I was at the radio station. My alarm clock would sound its irritating ring around 4:30 every morning. This particular night that I'm speaking of, my wife and the kids, they've gone to bed long ago. But that in itself wasn't enough of a hint for my talkative friend to go home to his own wife. Well, I was just, I was just fighting back from trying to fall asleep. My eyelids were getting heavier and heavier. So finally I couldn't take it anymore. And I said, Cecil, I'm going to bed. Now, you can stay here as long as you want, but when you leave, just turn the lights off. I never had a problem with Cecil ever since. Well, I'm going to give you a few clock statistics in this edition of Chewing the Fat. Try to keep your excitement contained, friends, okay? Promise me that. Did you know that the clock is one of the oldest human inventions? You see, about 400 years ago, Galilei, yeah, that's it, how you do it. He was sitting in church one night and he looked out the window. And there he saw a man swinging a lantern as he was walking. Well, this prodded his thinking to invent a pendulum clock, to accurately measure time. Now, I told you that this would be exciting, so brace yourself. I have another one here. Before the invention of the alarm clock, there was it was an actual profession. Some people are plumbers, other people are electricians. Well, this one, he was called a knocker-upper. Now, would I fool you? Would I tell you a fib, folks? That's right. He was called a knocker-upper. Now, this fellow's job was to go around and knock on your door until you got up to answer it. That was the alarm clock way back then, just so the fellow wouldn't be late for work. Now, here's another stat. There's an institute down in Colorado somewhere, and it has created a clock that is so accurate. Listen carefully. It's so accurate that it won't gain or lose a second in 20 million years. Now, when I read that, I thought to myself, well, who's going to be around and still alive to prove if this statement is right or wrong? By the way, this clock that I'm speaking of in Colorado, that's the one used for internet time that you have on your cell or on your laptop. Okay, just one more here. Back in the 18th century, Great Britain had they put a hefty tax grab on the purchase of clocks. Oh, hear my chimes going? It's 12 midnight. Good timing. Anyway, this was a tax that was put on the purchase of clocks. It was called the Parliament Clock Tax, And I'll tell you, when this tax came out, people were rightfully ticked off big time. And they demonstrated their anger by not purchasing clocks or watches. This literally put clockmakers out of business. It had such a negative impact that within a year, that tax was removed. Now, sit back. Here's one that, it's an important one to include. Did you know that every duck gets up at the very same time? Yep, right at the quack of dawn. Oh, I knew I should have quit while I was ahead. Well, friends, as I heard on my chime here, 12 midnight has come. Time to say goodnight. Oh, how I love to hear those chimes. Oh, when they chime in unison. Now, if I could only convince my neighbors here in the condo to have the same appreciation for those chimes as I do. Listen, it's great being with you. Can't wait for the next time. God bless you, and thank you again.